back to Harbour Unboxed. It is time for the April 2022. Can you believe it? Q&A.
Time's flown fast.
So we've had a lot of things happen throughout the month, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions about some of those things and then some random ones. I don't know, you guys do lots of question stuff, and hopefully we'll have some answers. We usually do. But yeah, not much more to say really. We're going to get into it, but before we do, today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryonaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description. Okay, while the RTX 30 series launched with a theoretical price to performance or price/performance increase over the previous generation, in practice, market simply priced all 30 series cards above the 20 series for a long time. Oh, sorry, the market. Didn't see that there. Do you expect the same thing for the next generation GPUs, something like a street price of $3,000 plus for the RTX 4080? Well, I don't think it'll be that extreme, but well, there's a lot of things to talk about there, really.
Yep.
I think we'll just go a bit back and forth on this one because, yeah, there really is a lot to cover. So I think, first of all, I think it's fair to say the heavily inflated prices that we've just seen over the last near enough to 2 years, I suppose, I don't expect that to be a thing based on the fact that, well, pricing is falling down, and I don't expect with the new generation that it'll go back to where it was. But I do think it's fair to say that pricing will be a little higher. There'll be some price creep compared to what we've seen from previous generations, depending on a few things. But I think they'll at least start out hoping for, there'll be strong demand for next generation products because people are already starting to hold out for them. And that's just the way it always is, right? Whenever there's new exciting products, people hold out for them and get excited about buying them. There's a great rush. So we've always seen at least a 2-week period where you cannot buy the newest, latest, greatest thing because people are just rushing and tripping over each other to get their hands on it. But yeah, so a bit of price creep. I think the next generation will be a little bit more expensive because of what AMD and Nvidia have learnt with previous generations, that people are willing to spend a lot of money. I do think though that, you know, the mid-range to low end, those cards will still exist and they will be somewhat reasonably priced depending on your opinion and outlook at that. I think if I had to guess, and I don't really want to, but the RTX 4080 class product, what would you say? I think that it was $700 for the previous generation, which we were really happy about, but then it wasn't, as the question points out, it wasn't really. Do you think that product's going to get to $800,000-$900,000?
I mean, if you ask me straight away, I would say around the pricing of the TI model, which is $1,200. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably where that sort of class product will sit for the next generation.
Creeping a bit higher than I thought, but yeah.
I mean, that's just a guess.
Sure.
Right? I don't know for sure, but yeah, I think what we saw last time when Nvidia attempted this sort of thing, the sort of not improving price to performance significantly, was the Turing generation. So we saw the RTX 20 series come out, and most of the products like the 2080, 2070 were fairly similar in price to performance to Pascal, but then they launched the 2080 Ti, which came up $1,200, and that sort of started this price creep. But I guess the justification Nvidia had was features like ray tracing and DLSS, which are not going to be new features for the 40 series. You know, they're already in those GPUs, and I don't. Well, you never know what Nvidia is going to do, right? But what's the likelihood they're going to have a feature set like that to justify not improving price to performance? So I think I find it hard to believe that we'd see stagnation to the level of Turing. I don't think Turing sold as well as Nvidia was expecting. Certainly not as well as, you know, Pascal. The hype wasn't there, etc. Not as much competition from AMD. So yeah, I'd be surprised if price to performance didn't improve. But I totally agree with you when you sort of say that the top end products are going to be more expensive. Certainly the 80 class, I would expect to get more expensive, and they're
especially
just going
like a TI or a 3090. Look,
yeah.
I won't be shocked if there is a $3,000 product. At least $2,000. We've said they won't go backwards from this generation in terms of MSRP. So yeah, I do think something that's well over 2,000, probably up around $3,000. I think that's possible, but that'll be well beyond the point of diminishing returns, like what we already see with the RTX 3090. So I don't think that's too much of a concern. That's not worth wasting too much energy on. We really want to see those sort of mid tier, those sort of the high end parts that make sense, the mid to high end. We want to see them being quite competitively priced. And again, there's so many things that are yet to be seen. Like, first of all, what kind of performance does the next gen hardware bring? All the rumors and hype and stuff suggest that it'll be quite a significant performance uplift, and I have no reason to doubt that. How competitive will AMD be with Nvidia? Just sort of depends on, because basically Nvidia want to generate the sale at the high end.
Yeah.
But if AMD come in with something that's much more cost effective and really impressive in terms of performance, those people that are always going to buy Nvidia will still buy Nvidia, but they'll be swaying a lot of people over to the AMD side. So then they want to make sure that they're not having to do huge price cuts, very early on and things like that. So hopefully it'll be fairly well thought out and there'll be some good mid-range offerings.
Yeah, I think when we see, if we do see significant performance improvements, like for example, if the 4080 was in excess of 80% faster than a 3080 type product, and a lot of the rumors are sort of, whether they're accurate or not, they're suggesting like around double the performance.
Yeah.
But if we say like 80% more performance, I don't think it's out of the realms that the 3080 today being $700 MSRP, creeping up to $1,000 plus.
Not at all.
Yes, it's a more expensive card, but also the performance has increased significantly. So I would expect that we're going to see quite a lot of that happening, where a lot of the classes that people like to talk about, where, I'm buying a 60 series GPU, is much more in line with the performance that we'd see from a 70 series GPU, because performance has increased by so much.
Yep.
So I would expect that, these companies are going to try to capitalize that and really muddy the waters for people so that, a 3070 previously cost 500 might now cost 800, but then you're getting way more performance than you would normally see from that generational uplift. So there's something to look out for. But as you've said, the pricing for a 4090 Ti doesn't really matter that much unless you're a super high-end buyer. Like, it doesn't matter if it costs $3,000 or $4,000. What we need to be looking at is the 4060, 4070. Where are those sitting? What are the performance improvements that we're getting? And like I said, I'd be very surprised if we didn't see some sort of price to performance improvement for the MSRP. But the other question is, that's relevant to this, how long will AIBs just go crazy with pricing again and do what this commenter was saying, whether it's like, they take the MSRPs, which improve price to performance, and then just raise the level to a level where the price goes up and there's no price to performance improvement anymore?
Well, that's a supply and demand thing. And the reason they were able to do it with the previous generation was largely because cryptocurrency mining. So unless we see another uptick in that shortly after the release of the next gen cards, then it will be primarily gamers that are chasing after these products.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then it would be like just any other GPU release in history where there wasn't a cryptocurrency boom. And that means gamers with the deeper pockets go mental, buy up all the initial stock, and for a period of time, they're unavailable, or if they are available, it's at sort of scalper prices or inflated prices from distributors/retailers. And historically, like, we've seen this time and time again, and people always jump to conclusions. I think even like mid-range, pretty, I don't want to say uninteresting, but like the RX 480, for example, wasn't like Pascal type hype, like a GTX 1080 type product. And that was still unavailable. And even the GTX 1060 from memory, they were still, availability was pretty scarce, pretty sketchy for about 4 weeks before we sort of, the channel caught up and they were readily available. But 2 weeks is the minimum. So it's don't draw any conclusions. Don't lose any hope if they're unavailable for at least 2 weeks, because that's almost certainly going to be the case. And I think after having come off the back of what we just have, it could be as much as 2 months, possibly more. Yeah,
possibly from gamer demands. We just have to sort of fingers crossed that other factors don't play into this launch.
Yep. Because there are other factors.
So hopefully, the supply issues, cryptocurrency obviously one aspect, but hopefully the supply chain has improved from the sort of COVID period that we've had, which has hurt things a lot. And then, I would expect as well that those lower tier cards, like the 3060, which would be 4060 tier-ish cards will take a long time to come to market. We've just seen the 3050, I think, take over 12 months. Was it nearly 18 months to come out? So, we're not going to be expecting the more value-oriented products to launch straight away. And I think that's another point that people need to sort of it's always happened. The cheaper cards don't come out straight away. But I think we need to sort of get used to that time period lengthening. And if you don't get your $300 or $400 GPUs straight away at launch, and they might be launching all those $2,000 products straight away, it doesn't mean they're not going to come out. So again, that's also going to make the whole generational price to performance improvement discussion quite challenging if they're not launching the more value-oriented cards straight away.
Yeah, it's a big gamble. It always has been to a degree, but it's a really big gamble at the moment because not that long ago, card pricing was absolutely absurd. And while it has improved significantly, it's still, by normal standards, quite absurd.
Yeah.
But in a month or so, if we start getting, RX 6600s and, the equivalent GeForce GPUs, RTX 3060s, 3060 Ti's, if we start seeing those cards hitting MSRP, even maybe, dipping below MSRP leading up to the next gen cards, for those people who have been really holding out, do you think, okay, well, the next gen cards are arriving, but it's probably going to be a few months before they settle down in price and are actually available, best case scenario, and then it's a few months after that before the tier that I'm actually interested in is released, and then there's probably going to be a lag period where they get snapped up as well. So am I looking at like a 6-month window here before I can get that next gen card at a reasonable price? So do I just, rather than take that gamble, buy now while I know I can? Because in 6 months from now, who knows where the state of things will be in 6 months. I'm certainly not going to even try to predict that. But I'm not advocating for doing one thing or the other because it absolutely is a gamble. So you're best off weighing up your options. How long have you been holding out for? What level of performance do you actually need to enjoy a game, is play with friends, do whatever it is that you're trying to get out of it? And if it happens to be that, an RX 6600 or, RTX 3060 MSRP allows you to do that, then it might be worth just doing that and waiting 6 to 12 months and seeing what the options are then.
I certainly think it makes more sense for the lower tier products, mid-range and lower, because those, I'd be surprised if we saw those cards in 12 months from now. It would certainly, even in the Turing era, it took, I think, about 6 months to get the 2060.
It's hard to say if we'll see a repeat of that, but it's absolutely...
But it's not going to be straight away.
No, I would say at least 6 months.
So I think...
So I agree.
For high-end buyers, it's, that's more of a time when you might consider waiting. And I talked about this recently in the GPU pricing update, where I think if you're going to be buying into the 3080 tier and above...
You're spending so much money doing it now anyway.
Yeah, you're spending a lot of money. But what we saw with this current series, the 30 series, just before launch, is people started offloading their old GPUs on the used market. We saw 2080 Ti's selling for like $500 used once the 3070 was announced at $500. So there could be an opportunity for people to capitalize on that, buying used cards for that sort of period just before or just after the announcement, but before the cards are available. And, if you're willing to make that gamble that stock is going to be poor and availability is going to suffer like it has the past 18 months, then, it might make sense to jump in and buy one of those used products from the previous generation. So there's certainly a lot of options you can take with this upcoming generation to sort of, depending on your circumstances. So
definitely
lots of stuff to get excited about.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about, a lot still that is a bit unknown. And ultimately, we can't give you any concrete answers on this one. But it's an interesting topic, and we really could go on and on and around. But I think we've probably spent enough time on that one, so we'll move on.
Why don't big PC integrators like Dell or HP, who make their own motherboards and hardware, use direct die cooling for their CPUs in their systems? This is something standardized for GPUs, where the manufacturer solders the chip on the PCB and puts the cooler on, but the companies who make such motherboards for their own systems have this capability too. Well, the main reason I would say for this is that most OEM integrators are trying to make the cheapest possible products. So we're not talking about like a boutique system builder where they're actually putting in effort to make the PC good. We're talking about cutting corners left, right, and center. And usually they make their own motherboards and hardware like that so that they can cut costs on components, so they don't need to put in beefy VRMs because they're going to power limit the CPU anyway. And then they want to, put proprietary hardware locks and stuff so that companies can lock you into their ecosystem and prevent you from doing your own DIY upgrades. So with these integrators not doing something like direct die cooling, it would cost money to implement direct die cooling. You would have to either delid the CPUs as they're shipped from Intel and AMD, or request that from Intel or AMD to be shipped in that way, which, I don't know, is that something that they're going to do?
I'm trying to understand the question. Yeah, I don't understand why they would...
I mean, direct die cooling would improve performance.
Yeah, I don't know why this is specifically targeted OEMs like Dell or HP. Like, why... I guess for me, the question is more like, why doesn't Intel do this like they used to back in the old school days with CPUs? And I know the answer to that.
Because it's more fragile.
More fragile. Like, the amount of damaged CPUs would be insane.
But I think this question is trying to make the equivalent between like a PC integrator who buys a motherboard and CPU and puts cooling on themselves, to like a GPU maker which buys the GPU die.
Sure, yeah, it's just an entirely different product.
But yeah,
that's not the product they're being sold.
Yeah, I agree. It's a different product, and they're trying to cut corners. They're not like Dell and HP systems. While some of them I'm sure are perfectly fine, they're not interested in giving you a super tuned, tailored experience.
No, that would be
more.
If Intel was going to do that, that would be something they'd be offering to the DeBowers of the world.
Yeah,
like a very expensive CPU.
It'd be a very expensive boutique system with custom liquid cooling, which Dell and HP are not shipping in the majority of their builds.
No,
they are shipping just your standard bog average OEM system, which would not be using something like this.
Yeah. How often do you flash your motherboard BIOS? Do you think that flashing the BIOS every time there's a new version is relevant? I don't think that's called for, to be honest. I think the way you would, it's kind of like don't fix if it ain't broke type deal.
Yep.
Generally, what I do is I'll check every couple of months the motherboard page for my relevant motherboard and see if there is a BIOS update, and see what that BIOS update, usually there's like sort of patch notes associated with it. So, does it fix an intermittent USB connection type error? And if it does and you're having that problem, then probably worth upgrading to. If you're not having that problem, then up to you. As I said, if it ain't broke, no need to apply a fix, because you could end up causing another problem or bricking it or whatever. But usually, as long as you don't lose power, and there are ways like BIOS flashback and stuff like that to get around those failed flashes. But yeah, basically see what the patch notes say, and if you're having a problem with your system and you think that'll fix it, or it addresses, a security concern, something along those lines, then it's worth doing. But yeah, I find myself not doing every single one, because some of them are just like adding CPU support for a CPU that I'm not going to use or don't want to use at this point in time. And then the one after that may be a security update, so I'll do that, which will add the CPU support in as well. How much performance is left on the table if you drop a Ryzen 5000 series CPU into a 300 series motherboard? I haven't looked into it, that specific scenario, but I would say next to no performance is left on the table. If you took a 300 series board, at least one that isn't going to VRM throttle or something silly like that, and a 500 series board, you use the same memory, latest BIOSes, they should be fairly indistinguishable.
Yeah, I would have thought the only concerns would be PCI, not having PCI 4.0 support is going to be one potential limiting factor.
I think maybe up to, for most scenarios, 5%.
Unless you have a 6500 XT.
Well, that's, yeah.
And then I guess the other area would be potentially the quality of motherboards with memory compatibility is probably not as good on 300 series as the 500 series stuff.
Yeah, again, even that thing's board dependent. Yeah. So, but it's certainly something that I actually will be looking into in the near future, as sort of an upgrader's guide, because there's been so many questions around this, and I think it's quite interesting to have a snapshot, a look back at the whole first generation, and by first generation Ryzen, I mean like the AM4 generation of Ryzen, and see how that all ties together as we're coming up to the end of it.
Yep.
But yeah, my gut feeling is nothing that you need to worry about. Okay, a sort of monitor graphics card question. I think I'll start by trying to fumble my way through this, and then I'll pass it over to Tim to just smash it out of the park. Why do GPUs have more display ports than HDMI ports? Yet monitors have more HDMI than DisplayPort ports. It's almost like a tongue twister. Well, I would say, because I think the dominant output for PC users would be DisplayPort. That's preferable, in my opinion, to HDMI. But you're only needing one connection to the monitor, right?
Yeah.
Unless it's like a bandwidth thing where it's like a full,
well, those monitors suck anyway, so it's
so
probably not
monitors
even worth
that
thinking
don't.
about.
So yeah, the graphics card is wanting to output multiple streams to multiple devices, whereas the monitor isn't wanting to connect to multiple graphics cards.
Yeah, like you're not outputting all 4 of your cables into the one monitor because that's just creating 4 different inputs.
You've got your innies and your outies around the wrong way.
Yeah, the simple reason is that most output devices that are not PCs, so everything else, almost all of those use HDMI. You know, your game consoles, HDMI only, things like Chromecast, HDMI only, media players, HDMI only.
So you're putting multiple different devices into the monitor rather than...
Yeah, when you're using multiple different devices with the one display, you want to have the majority of those ports being highly compatible ports that are used with most things. If you were swapping HDMI for DisplayPort, you can still use HDMI with most PCs, but you can't use DisplayPort with most other things.
Yes.
So, you know, DisplayPort has its benefits from being higher bandwidth generally. HDMI 2.1 causes some differences there, but generally speaking, DisplayPort's easy to use, higher bandwidth, and that's why we typically see them on monitors, and HDMI is sort of the fallback. But really the reason is just most devices use HDMI. So if there was a high bandwidth, royalty-free connector that was used across all devices, you wouldn't see DisplayPort used. You'd see that HDMI version used because it would be compatible with everything. So yeah.
Do you think that if AMD can take the performance and thermal crown with the next-gen GPUs, they'll actually still be able to outsell Nvidia's cards and become the go-to for at least the generation? I feel people just buy what they know. So definitely a hard no on that one. And yeah, the reason's market share, mind share, all those share things. So for AMD to really take over, it's a slow process, but they need to be really the performance leaders, the outright better option for multiple generations, or at least there has to be not even the better option. Maybe that's not the right way of putting it. Like a Ryzen situation where it's the better value, the better investment, the better buy.
Yeah.
They need to be the better buy, at least in the mid-range, like the mainstream, the bulk of the market. They need to be the better buy for multiple generations.
I think it goes a bit beyond that, because I think what you're saying is true for CPUs for sure, and we saw that with Ryzen as the example of where that worked. But I think with CPUs, the people buying super high tier products like Core i9s and Ryzen 9 processors is pretty limited. Like most gamers, even if you buy a super flagship GPU, are perfectly fine with mid-tier CPUs. And by mid-tier, I mean Ryzen 5 and 7, Core i5, Core i7. Whereas I think with GPUs, AMD needs to not only do what you're saying, but also have the outright performance leader, because I think that drives a lot of mind share. And NVIDIA's had a lot of wins by being able to say, we have the fastest gaming GPU, and that flows through the entire product stack, even if a product like the 3060 is actually worse value than the RX 6600 XT or whatever the competitive product is. So I think they need to do both of those things. And on top of that, and this is where it's going to be very difficult for them, is that even if they didn't have the fastest GPU and had better price to performance at most areas, people would still buy NVIDIA GPUs for their features. So they need to beat NVIDIA GPUs on features too, and then do that for multiple generations. And that's where they'll get back. Because it's not as easy as it is for them with CPUs. CPUs are very singular focused devices. They do one thing. They compute things.
The only angle that we're missing in this potentially is the tie-in with CPUs. So stuff like SAM.
Yeah, but is Sam really selling anyone on anything?
Well, I'm just saying if that progresses as the generations
Possibly.
go on, and it certainly
That's
helps.
an opportunity for them.
Yeah, it's certainly if all gamers are jumping towards Zen 4, let's say Zen 4 is another, it's another significant step on the 5800X 3D. Like,
it's a successful generation.
It's a successful generation that's quite clearly the better gaming CPU. I think that will also help sell Radeon GPUs.
I think so.
Because I think if they, let's be honest, if the 5700 XT, if they had for that generation, the original RDNA generation, they had an RTX 2080 Ti competitor, they would have sold significantly more GPUs.
I think so.
And that would have helped strengthen the brand for the next generation.
But I think it's all of these factors that we've been talking about all need to combine for them. And like I said, I think with CPUs, it's so much easier to gain those sorts of market share because the device only does one thing, which is processing things. Whereas with the GPU, you're not just buying its rasterization performance, you're buying how does it go with ray tracing, how does it go with features, how does it go with encoding. It's a really multi-purpose device. And of course, yes, people go to the comments and say CPUs also can do all sorts of other things, but I think you get what I'm saying, right? Like GPUs today have become a battle of features and performance. And AMD has, for this generation of RDNA 2, they've been able to produce a really fast GPU that's competitive. They've got some good price to performance wins in certain categories. They're not winning on features, certainly not winning on features.
Well,
they don't have the outright fastest GPU. So there's a few things they need to do there. And then again, do that for year after year after year.
Yeah,
and Nvidia won't give them what Intel's given them.
No. And another part that we may have glossed over is that availability plays a big part in it.
Yeah, they need to spam them out.
So it takes more than just having the fastest, best card for the next few generations. They also have to have the best availability.
Best supply chain, shipping them out.
If they had significantly better availability for this past generation, so say they had access to many more 7nm wafers, they would have carved significantly greater inroads into that market share than they were able to.
Yep, and marketing as well, because they not only do they need everything that we've just been talking about and keep adding stuff to, they then need to be able to actually put money into marketing the cards because, again, NVIDIA's GeForce brand, NVIDIA puts a lot of time and effort into marketing and marketing their things. Yeah. And again, it's like...
They are the brand of the influencer.
Yeah, like I said, NVIDIA will not give them an Intel opportunity. No. They are not the sort of company that does that, and historically they haven't. So it's just, it's going to be very tough for them, and I think... based on this discussion where we've sort of come up with point after point after point where they have to execute, it's going to be difficult, but we'll just have to wait and see what the execution's like.
Okay, question here from Nick on our Discord, long-time supporter. Thank you, Nick. Will you be switching the GPU benchmark rig over to the 5800X 3D or 1200KS for future benchmarks? Because, use the fastest CPU to remove... Did I say CPU? Did I say CPU correctly then? I slurred my word a bit. We use the fastest CPU to remove the CPU bottleneck. That's right, isn't it? That's what we do for testing GPUs.
Use the fastest CPU to remove the CPU bottleneck. Yeah.
I know what we're doing here. I know what's going on.
So what are you going to do?
Stop questioning me, Tim. Am I going to do? Probably not. Is the answer to that one, because it's almost worth upgrading to the 5800X 3D or 1200KS because they are so much faster, but I could have done the 1200K earlier than this, for example. I'll probably wait till the next gen CPUs for that sort of big next generation platform update and rejig everything then. The only reason I would upgrade before then is because we get next gen GPUs. So I guess we'll see what the timing's like there with next gen GPUs and CPUs. But it'd be sort of an incremental update. And while it would be nice to do that, it's like the amount of data. If I showed you the Excel file, you'd just gulp deeply and be like, nah, I'm out. So yeah, I've done a lot of updating of data, and it, for the most part, would be a waste of time to do that, I think. All right, Tim, sit down, relax. I've got a long one here for you. It's a bit long-winded, this actually, guys. Try and keep these concise. Is GTX dead?
That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
Yes. Okay. Yes, it is dead.
Ooh, big call.
I would think so.
No, it was dead this generation, wasn't it?
If we're counting laptop GPUs, I think they still make the MX series, which is not GTX, but is MX, and those don't support ray tracing. But for all intents and purposes, it's dead, right? Like the next generation of GPUs, every single part is going to support ray tracing. Same with AMD. Same with Intel, by the looks of things.
I miss GTX. I still want to say it every time.
GTX, RTX. Which one's better in terms of flowing off the tongue?
I like GTX.
I think GTX is...
RTX?
RTX,
I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe don't know about that. But
I don't like change.
Yeah, I think... Yeah, with ray tracing was first debuted in Turing in 2018, wasn't when those parts came out. So, we're 4 years on. There's really no reason for.
Yeah, well, they're not going to switch back
GTX
now with all the
parts.
marketing and stuff that's been put in an RTX. So yeah, I mean,
It's
as you
dead.
say, it's certainly dead for high-end to mainstream stuff.
I mean, AMD's making APUs that support ray tracing with like integrated graphics. So I'd be surprised if even if we got a part lower than the RTX 3050, like that sort of part's still going to support ray tracing.
We agree.
Yeah.
All right, going to hit pause there. Part 1 is done. I know it's always depressing when part 1's over, but the good news is we will have a part 2. So, you can look forward to that. It'll be on the channel probably tomorrow. Depends on how the editing goes. But anyway, thank you very much to everyone who did ask a question. Thank you to those who upvoted the questions they enjoyed and wanted to see answered the most. Hopefully you're satisfied with our answers so far. But if not, well, hang in there. Hang in there with us. Give us a chance to redeem ourselves. What do you reckon, Tim?
That's very fair. But if you did think our questions answering ability was good, consider supporting the channel.
Yeah,
Patreon, Float Plane. So just subscribing to the YouTube channel helps a little bit, a tiny little bit, probably.
Helps heaps. Do it. Definitely do it. It makes a world of difference.
Yeah. Don't
Please.
unsubscribe.
Yeah, no, don't
do that.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it, isn't it?
I think so. We've got Float Plane, Patreon for those of you who want more Tim and Steve on their screens.
Don't know why.
Not judging, but if you do, Float Plane, Patreon, you get access to behind-the-scenes content, Q&As. Our Discord chat is awesome, our exclusive Discord server. So you can chat with Tim about monitors, you can chat about me with whatever you want, really. And what else do we do? There's another thing, behind-the-scenes content.
Yep.
So
I think that's pretty much it.
a lot of cool stuff there. So if you're interested, check it out. If not, we won't be offended. Well, Tim might be, I won't be. I'm fine with it. Tim will be a little bit offended. So yeah, I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.